Okay, so we've got carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and then this is a quick energy source. So this is what our body is going to go to first to break down for energy. What does the diagram look like? Good. So I'm not concerned that you know that it's got carboxyl groups and carboxylic acid and all of that stuff. I just want you to know that it is a string or chain of these hexagons. Now, there's a couple different types that you need to know about carbohydrates. So there's starches and then there's sugars. And this wasn't on like where I asked you to write this down from the video, so make sure that you add this to your notes. So all starches are long chains of carbohydrates. So starches are things like in potatoes. There's a type of starch in potatoes that we can eat. Yes, sir.
How do we know they look like that? Or is it just a
scientific concept? No, it's a actual, like you can see the molecules under a microscope.
Okay.
Yeah. You can see things, and I mean, whenever we're talking about molecular structure, that's like an electron microscope. So I mean, you can see those structures with a strong enough microscope. And the reason, and this is just kind of a fact, or like a fun fact, if you will. I think it's fun because I'm a nerd. But the reason that they're in like the cyclic form is because whenever it's an aqueous solution, they form that ring, and that's how they're most stable. So starches are long chains, while sugars are shorter chains. Yes. So sometimes they can even be single. So like a single carbohydrate by itself, things like glucose and fructose. I don't know if you've heard those words before, but like diabetics, they check their glucose levels in their bloodstream. Whenever they're checking their sugar, that's what they're checking. And that is a simple sugar, and that is the glucose that we break down to use to fuel the production of ATP. We'll get to talk about that with cellular respiration. But just know that there's, complex starches and then there's simple sugars. What are some examples? So sugar. What other things did they talk about in the video as examples? They talked about pasta loading before a long run. So things like bread and pasta. These are all things that contain mainly carbohydrates. What are the monomers? Good. So again, this mono means single, and then saccharide means sugar. Here, I can zoom in on that. Oh, wrong one. There we go. So the monomer is the monosaccharide. Think of if the brick wall were a carbohydrate, the single brick would be a monosaccharide. So it's just one of the building blocks that's used to build the molecule. So like I said, our body uses these for a quick source of energy. Whenever there's things like low carb or no carb diets, what happens after a few hours of not eating carbs? How do you feel?
Very hungry.
You feel very, very hungry. So a lot of times you'll feel like weak, not very like quick to think. You just kind of don't feel great if you just stop eating carbs. And the reason is because carbs are stored. So whenever we eat carbs, we break down a lot of them right then and there, especially if we like eat carbs right before we go work out or go on a run or something like that. We're going to immediately burn through those. But if we eat carbs and then we don't perform some sort of strenuous type of activity, our body will store those in the form of glycogen. And that's the starch in our body that's broken down by insulin. And that's what happens whenever there's insulin imbalances with diabetics, is there's either too much glucagon, I can't say that word today, being broken down at one time. Therefore, there's more sugar in the bloodstream, or there's not enough being broken down at a time. And so there's too much stored. And that can either which way be hard on your body. But we can only store about 24 hours worth. And so after 24 hours, if you have not eaten any carbs, you've burned through your carbohydrate reserve, and you can start, your body will start burning through lipids and proteins in your body. And we'll talk about those types of things too. Okay. Lipids. What elements are in lipids?
Carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, I think. Yeah, nitrogen.
So phosphorus and nitrogen aren't in primary lipids. There are things like phospholipids, but the lipids in general only contain carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Okay, what are lipids used for?
Structural component of the cell membrane and energy storehouse.
Okay, so long-term energy storage. Also used for insulation. And then we've also got cell membrane. So we will talk about the structure of a cell and the hierarchical components of a cell. Again, that just goes back to systems and system models and things like that. Think of the cell as like a little factory, and each factory has its own subunits that need to do certain jobs. That's how our cell is. The cell membrane is what holds all of that stuff in one place. And that's where you've got things like phospholipids. So those don't fit into the general category of normal like storage lipids. And they're very special lipids, and we'll talk a little bit more about those. But we do need to note that lipids are what makes up the cell membrane. The diagram of a lipid. What did the little cartoon diagram look like on the video?
One small one, I guess.
So that's a good one. The one that it shows on the video is like simplified a little bit. And it kind of, one person said it looks like a jellyfish that got shut in a door. but I'll talk about the components of that. So your structure is like basically just more advanced of this. But what's going on with this is that these right here are what's called the fatty acid chain. And then this right here is your glycerol. So it's got two monomers. Those are the monomers, glycerol and fatty acids. Those are your two monomers for this molecule. It's important to understand, and I'm going to color code here. If you see this carbohydrate here, glycerol is a carbohydrate. So this just shows that these macromolecules will build upon each other to change what they do. So even though, this is kind of an application question, so even though they have all carbon, hydrogens, oxygens, they've got the same elements here, why is the function of lipids different?
There's more carbohydrates than the single.
Which
one.
change what?
Which changes the amount they can hold, which progresses the amount of time it can hold.
So think like even bigger than that. So overall, what is different about a lipid than a carbohydrate? I'll give you a hint. It's in the title of the unit. Structure, exactly. So,
I was just kind of guessing.
yeah, no, that's the exact answer. So because the structure is different, the function is different. That is like the big aha that is in this unit, is whenever you change the structure of something, even though it's got the same elements, just because the structure is different, the function is different. And you can even see that with some sugars. So like I've mentioned fructose earlier. If you've got fructose and you've got glucose, our body does not use fructose in the reaction to make ATP. It only uses glucose. And so fructose is usually just gone and stored as glycogen. It changes chemically to be kind of a storage starch. It can't be used immediately for for energy like glucose can. So and they literally have the same amount of carbons, hydrogens, and oxygens. It's just in a different orientation. What are some examples of lipids? Fats and oils, good. I'd also add waxes just because they're honorable mention, if you will. So what's something about fats and oils and waxes that you think of in terms of properties of water? So we talked about properties of water. What do fats and oils and waxes mix or not mix? They don't mix. So we mentioned that cell membrane earlier. Well, those cells are encased in water. So again, we've got water all through our body, and all of these cells are surrounded by water. And so the reason that the cell membrane holds everything in is because they've got a fatty acid chain that doesn't like water, and it's able to twist in on itself to protect all of those organelles within it. Super neat. And it's all just because of the chemistry of water and that molecule. And then we talked about the monomers. The monomers are fatty acids and glycerol. So make sure you've got that. Okay. Next step. Did everyone get lipids?
Yeah.
Good? Okay. Sorry. Sometimes I feel like I move too fast. Okay. Proteins. What elements are in proteins?
Carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, hydrogen.
Good. So whenever they talked about in the video, they said cho, chon, and chomp.
I didn't mean to say yes, sir. I'm so sorry.
What? Oh, I didn't even
I
notice.
said yes, sir. I don't mean to.
It takes a lot to offend me. You're good.
Sorry.
You're fine.
Yes, ma'am.
It's okay. So sorry. Now I'm Googling. Okay. So it's got carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and then this fancy little nitrogen here just completely changes the chemistry of it. It adds a polarity to it that it didn't have before. Again, we'll talk about this a little more in detail whenever we talk about enzymes. Speaking of, what are proteins used for?
And build the body's tissue.
Good. So muscle building. What else did the video talk about? You'll just stopped after the first one. Okay. So it's also used in the immune system. And then it is also used as what's called enzymes. Has anyone ever heard of an enzyme before? Yeah, good. Okay. So all an enzyme is a very specific protein that performs a specific function. So for instance, in our stomachs, we've got enzymes that are made to break down specific bonds between things like carbon and carbon bonds. So when we eat something, those enzymes are what breaks those bonds apart for our food to break down into smaller particles for us to use it in our body. All of that's done with enzymes. So if we didn't have those enzymes, we would not be able to break those bonds. Those are reactions that don't happen without enzymes there. So we'll talk about enzymes in a separate unit very specifically. Just know we'll refer back to them. Enzymes are proteins, proteins are enzymes. The structure that they give you in the video is just a very crude structure, if you will. So it's just depicting that it's got these units. Think about a protein like a band of Mardi Gras beads. So each bead is a separate little subunit, is a separate monomer, and they're connected by this string, and you get this super duper long string of proteins. It's called a polypeptide. So that chain of those subunits, imagine it folding over on itself. If you just wad up that Mardi Gras bead and you wad it up and you twist it, and it gets stuck like that. That's pretty much what a protein is a long, super long chain of amino acids that folds over on itself and folds over again and then twists and turns. And it just creates this really complex molecule that can perform very specific functions. If you take AP Chemistry your senior year, you'll get to learn chemically why they act different and what they do. So that's pretty neat. What are some examples of proteins?
Like culture in
So meat. What else?
Beans,
Beans.
power bars.
Power bars. So protein bars, protein shakes. So usually those are like crude proteins from meats and beans that have been basically extracted and chemically changed to taste better. So whenever you're eating a steak, what are you eating off of a cow?
The fat,
What else?
protein.
What's the protein? No, those are the monomers. So like whenever, if I have a ribeye, it's off of a certain part of the cow, but what like body group, if you will, is that?
Steak.
What?
Steak.
What is steak made of? Meat. What's meat?
Fat.
Nope. Muscle. You are literally eating the muscle of a cow. So whenever you eat a steak, you're eating the muscle of a cow. So just like our muscle building from proteins, you're just eating the muscle built from a different animal. That's what you're eating whenever you eat chicken breast. That's a breast muscle off of a chicken. The reason that it's so big is because they don't fly. They just hang around on the ground. So that's why it's nice and big and has little fat particles in it that make it taste better. Has anybody eaten duck? Okay. Oh, only one person. Or two people have had duck. Okay, a few. So duck usually tastes, they like to say the word gamier, and that's because those are flight birds. So that muscle is used more, therefore those particles are tightly packed together. They're not as tender or juicy or anything like that because there are actually more muscle particles there, and they just have a different texture to them. Yes, sir.
You ever ate poopin'?
A what?
A poopin'.
No, I have not. What's a poofin?
It's a bird that
Like a puffin?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I've never heard it called.
Poopin'.
I've never heard it called a poofin. I've only ever heard it called a puffin.
Well, when you go to the rural one, that's not they call it a poopin'.
Okay, I didn't know that. But yeah, things like duck and deer and like those that are like gamier animals. So a cow, you see them out in the field and they're just sitting there chewing cud and like not doing much. And so they can hold fat and they're not out there exercising. So their muscles are a little looser fibers. And so that's why it tastes so good and it's so tender. But anyways, so that's my connection there. Another thing, so notice the CHO, 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 all of them have those in common because they're building upon each other. So again, you can't have lipids without carbs. You can't have proteins and lipids without carbs. You can't have carbs without lipids. You can't have carbs without proteins. It's all intertwined. And the monomers, we have already said, yeah, amino acids. What did one acid say to the bully acid? Quit being amino acid.
Oh my god.
That's a good one.
Oh my god. Oh,
You are welcome.
That was a good one.
Thanks. I appreciate your enthusiasm.
I'm gonna start using that from now on.
Good. Yes, sir. Yes, Joseph. Why can't you trust an atom? Because they make everything up. Or they make up everything. Okay, what are the elements in nucleic acids?
Oxygen, nitrogen. Oh gosh.
Phosphorus. Good job. So again, we're building upon each other. It's got the same CHON, but then that extra little P, again, it just changes the chemistry of it. So what are nucleic acids used for?
Storage and expression of genetic info.
Good. Storage and expression of genetic information. So we'll go into genetics in a lot of detail. What's so funny over there? You still laughing at my joke?
Yes,
Yeah.
Oh, so funny. So funny. Okay. So, we will go into plenty of detail on nucleic acids and how they store and express genetic information. But we won't go into a ton of detail this time. This is just for the use of structure. Okay. The structure looks one single unit kind of looks a little bit like this. Again, we will go into a lot of detail about it later. But for now, all you need to know is that this little thing, and I'm using my blue marker again because you guessed it, it's a carbohydrate. So this right here is called a ribose sugar, and it's a sugar. So whenever we talk about DNA and RNA, it's a sugar phosphate backbone. So again, all of these build upon each other, and you can't have one without the other.
Wow.
Wow.
Science.
What are some examples of nucleic acid?
Oh my gosh, RNA.
RNA and DNA. Again, we will learn all about those. Those are very chemically similar. The only difference between DNA and RNA is RNA has one more extra oxygen, so that's what the deoxy part of DNA means. So RNA has one more extra oxygen, and then it's got uracil instead of thymine. So anyways, there's a couple little differences we'll talk about when we talk about DNA. But again, those two little differences completely change the chemistry of it and the function. And the monomers, what are they called? Good. So pretty straightforward. Nucleotide, nucleic acid. It's easy to remember. We'll talk more about carbs, lipids, and proteins because that's what we're going to be testing in our lab. Nucleic acids we will revisit when we start to end this unit and go into genetics, into our next unit, where we talk about why our body is built the way it is and why our eyes are blue or green or brown, or why our hair is blonde or black or brown, and if you're 5'2" or if you're 6'3", why all of that happens. So I love genetics. I'm super excited about it. Okay. Any questions on this? Do it? Yeah. Okay. I'll let you take a picture and then I'll put it back up here for those online to make sure they've got it. So I will, after I get this paper back, what you're going to do now